Support for this episode comes from the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. Applications and nominations are now open for the Diller Teen Tikkun Olam Awards. These awards honor up to 15 Jewish teens from across the United States with an award of $36,000 each to recognize their impact and leadership to repair the world. Nominate a teen leader today, or they can apply directly by January 9th, 2025. Learn more at dillerteenawards.org.
This is Judaism Unbound, episode 455, Wedding Magic. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
I'm Lex Rofberg.
And I'm Miriam Terlinchamp.
And this is going to be one of the more personal Judaism Unbound episodes that we've had. I don't think necessarily the most personal, Lex. I think, if I recall correctly, about 8 years ago, not to age you too much, but we had an episode about your Bar 26va ceremony where you, we were talking about your own Jewish ritual that you were going to be doing. And today, actually, we're going to be talking about Miriam's upcoming Jewish ritual because she's getting married. Now, Yay! So I'm really excited to talk with you, Miriam, about this today. Before we get into that conversation, just want to remind folks that our most recent series of full semester on yeshiva classes have just begun, but that doesn't mean that you can't still sign up for them. Thanks to the miracle of asynchronous learning, you can sign up now and get the recording from the first session of whatever class you signed up for, and you can just jump in this week and join the class synchronously along with the whole class if that's what you want, or you can keep being asynchronous for a while. So if you want to sign up for any of these amazing classes, just go to judaismunbound.com/classes and sign up for them. Okay, so let's jump into this conversation. Miriam, tell us a little bit about how you came to be having kind of an unbound wedding ceremony coming up.
So first, I just want to do a word of caution for all our listeners. This is what happens when you listen to this podcast too much, is it works like a little worm into your head, and all of a sudden everything gets asked the question, well, what job is the wedding? What job is the witnesses? And you start to think about it with this open mind, and then hopefully your partner or partners are along the ride with you. I also want to say that I'm in my 40s, and at any point in life, I think love or finding a best friend or another soul that you can connect with, or souls, is a true miracle. And that's the way that both of us say it in this case. And since it feels like a miracle and such a gift, I think that we just decided to take the marking of this union very, very seriously and be intentional about every component of it.
So paint the picture a little bit just for a starting point. Let's imagine somebody who is used to going to a typical Jewish wedding, and now let's imagine that same person coming to your wedding. What are they going to notice?
Oh, poor people. So I think the first thing is that I've officiated something like 280 weddings. And so for me, the whole point was that it would feel absolutely unique. So maybe in a traditional wedding of any kind, you'd come in, you'd wear something formal or something pretty, or whatever that looks like. There'd be an aisle, perhaps there'd be a chuppah, a canopy that the groom and the bride, or the brides and the grooms, would be walking towards. There would be one officiant working at the end of that. And then you'd sort of walk through about a 20-minute ceremony that includes a lot of Hebrew and traditional liturgy that's been passed on from generation to generation. And then maybe you did dance. I think that a lot of people's focus is in the party and the celebration. So I think the primary difference about our wedding than maybe a classic wedding is that our focus is on the people in the room, not on the couple necessarily. We could have gone down to a courthouse, or frankly, we have plenty of clergy friends who could have just signed a paper and voila, there it would be. And for us, we said, if we're going to invite a circle of witnesses, we want the focus of that witnesses of the village that we're bringing our love into to have a substantial role in it. And so it's highly interactive. The person who is holding the space is actually our very close friend who's an ordained Episcopalian priest. And so we had to get approval from the bishop.
And just clarifying, both of you are Jewish.
Both of us are Jewish professionals. Yeah, both of us are Jewish professionals, live a very traditional Jewish life at home. And yet we feel like the person who we could both agree on, who we think we're in a relationship because this person blessed us from the very beginning and celebrated our union, we wanted her to be the one who helped make this happen. So that already is going to be a little bit different. And we have 2 children. And so the children are very active participants. We feel like this is a family union and a community union because we already know what it is between us. And so this is a larger scope of who the center of the attention's on.
So I'm really excited to rewind to the first thing you said about how, I mean, not that our podcast is lovely and mind expanding, but that specifically you were thinking about what job does the wedding do? What job do the witnesses do? And just for those who haven't listened to some of our episodes about that, the what you mean by that is that for us, rituals do things. And even like ritual objects are doing spiritual work. And we're always interested in what that work is. The question of like, what does a wedding do? Or maybe what does a Jewish wedding do? It's not obvious. Like there's different answers to that question. Even people, by the way, that are doing classic, relatively traditional Jewish weddings, I think if you ask them, like, what did you just do? Some of them would say, well, I joined in a traditional fashion, a kind of ceremony that has been done for hundreds of years. And we as a couple, by doing so, connected to a tried and true ancient practice. That's like one job that doing a traditional kind of wedding could do. Another job would be we articulated through language that we chose, through language that is in the liturgy, through practices, through walking in circles, through whatever set of things, we articulated a form of connection to one another that we wanted to, and we did it publicly. The public piece might be a core part of it. Like we could list a bunch more, like different, it's amazing how you talk to people who get married and they actually have very different core acts that they describe as happening. That question of what job does a wedding do is really interesting. And you've given us a sense, like you've told us that for you, having your children play a key role, having your community beyond just your nuclear family is really important. Can you say a little more about like what work, what job, and I don't mean to say it's like tedious or a task, but like what jobs is this wedding doing? And I mean both like the ceremony and the broader full day or days of it.
Something that was always meaningful to me when I would officiate other people's weddings was the breaking of the glass. And my partner said, I don't want to break anything on our wedding day. I want to build something. So why don't we get a glass artist to come in and we'll make some beautiful art, glass art together. And I was like, no, we will burn this place down. We cannot do that. But like, what is the point? And I always love to explain it. And I'm sure this is a creative explanation because I know a traditional explanation of the breaking of the glass is that we mourn the destruction of the temple and that even on a day such as this, there's still mourning and pain and suffering in the world. And I always like to add to the second part of that, even on a day as beautiful as this, we remember that the world has plenty of unfinished work and that through our union, we're making the world a better place and that we're committing to justice in the world, that we will amplify our justice through our love. And so for us, that has been a central component of the wedding itself. We live in Ohio. It is election season. We are in the birthplace of JD Vance. There's a lot going on here. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was say, if you're going to be here with us through love, let's hit the streets together. So on Shabbat, you can choose to go to services. You can go to the zoo, or you can join us in a 4-hour campaign around the blocks to try to get out the vote. We need to be making this world different, and we do that through love, and our love looks like being in the streets. Part of why we are doing that piece of the justice work is not only because of where we are place-based and that we have to do work in our neighborhood, but because we believe that the job of the wedding is to bring people together to do good in the world. Another component that we felt was really important was that the ketubah signing, the covenantal obligation, isn't just something we downloaded from the internet, which there's wonderful things on the internet. There's beautiful art. I happen to be an artist myself. This is so gross, and I'm just sharing it with the whole world by telling you all this, but one component of our relationship is that on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, my partner gives me a handwritten card every Friday, and I give them a watercolor. And so over the course of these years, we have hundreds of watercolors and cards. And so art has been a core part of this. And so when we thought of the ketubah, it felt strange to use other people's words and other people's art. And we thought, well, why should we just be the ones who sign this? This contract isn't just us. It is everyone who we've asked to be in the room. At that part of the ceremony, the covenant we're asking the people in the room to do is to sign it. And the signing is going to be an art project, which anyone who's showing up there is going to be down for. It'll be okay. And so we're not signing it actually with our signatures. We're signing it through this sort of collective art project of saying that together this group is building through love. So we're constantly reiterating that our job is justice, our job is the village, that our job is changing the world, and we do that through creative acts.
So, by the way, on the breaking the glass piece, I love what you brought. I mean, I have long held that we're missing it on the breaking the glass explanations. I try very hard to not give it like explanation out loud, because I actually think that the ritual intuition of it, I think is right, which is that you end the ceremony with a big crash that's loud and that is fun and that leads to everyone saying Mazal Tov. And I actually don't think that it originated for any kind of mourning. I think it's part of an entire universe. Like, part of this is interfaith work. There are other cultures that have breaking stuff as parts of weddings. And I don't think it's to mourn brokenness, although that's a beautiful thing to bring in, that we would merge sadness and joy even on such a happy occasion. I think it's that you end the service, you end the ceremony, transitioning into the rest of the day. It's not, you're creating a continuity between the ceremony and the rest, which is meant to be like loud dancing and noise making and revelry and eating and drinking. Like, the crash, the breaking is meant to lead you into that. And I think it works. I actually think that it sets that tone. It gets everybody in the room cheering naturally. And then you're like into the cocktail hour and the revelry. And so I don't talk about Jewish tradition in that moment. I just let it do that. But like, that's not to say that the other explanations aren't beautiful. I often encourage couples to put them in like the program or something. I just don't always vocalize it.
It's interesting that you say that, because I feel like the brokenness is part of what partnership entails, that there's just I never like to say in sickness and health, and because all kinds of things change and our loyalties change and our connections change. But I do think that there is some moment to say something about that. And for us, we thought a lot about that Mazal Tov piece, Lex. So I'm so glad you brought it up. And so we decided that we would break the glass, or we're doing something with the glass. We're not quite sure. So we'll find out in a couple of days what we'll be doing. But we have our cousins lined up, and the moment the Mazal Tov happens, the chairs will get pushed to the side and the room will transform. And from that moment, the music will sort of start pumping up, and the horror will happen right in that moment, in that space, and not be transitioning to another place, because the interplay between what is solemn, what is joyful, what are we doing? What are we waiting around for? But also that, again, this is an amplifying moment for everyone in the room, that we're trying to change what's happening in the world. So I love that you brought it up like that. I never thought of it quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's really pivotal to bring in, whether it's, I don't know if it's sadness. I mean, at other moments in the ceremony, I tend to actively seek out ways to mark like those loved ones who are no longer alive and are not at the wedding. That's typically something that people, including the couple themselves, are thinking about often, especially their parents are thinking about their own parents who might not be alive anymore and are not there and would have loved it. So like, there's holding that layer. Some people literally have like chairs at the front that are marking their deceased relatives that are left empty. There's all sorts of different ways to do that. And what you said about like naming that marriage is not just like this pure happy-go-lucky thing, that there are moments of real hardship that you navigate together. That's important too. And I have found that having it as the punctuation mark, having the sorrow, it's just like not experientially true. Like, I think it's a misread of what breaking the glass is. Like, we assume brokenness is about something bad happening. I think that breaking that glass did not come from a place of like brokenness in that sense. I think it came initially from like making noise. I think there's different strategies, and what we share is like, we want to think very deeply about what that glass breaking's work is. That's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I mean, that's what sounds right to me, Lex. It's like, as you're talking, I'm like, does it matter what the original, was it to make noise? Was it to do something else? I mean, what we know is that in our time, the great majority of wedding officiants say that it has to do with the brokenness of the temple and whatnot. And for me, the question is, what do we want it to be moving forward? You know, what can it be? And just as I was listening to you, and I was thinking, like, duh, of course it makes sense for, as soon as the glass breaks, for the kind of dancing to start, especially if it's about the witnesses, about the community, the village that's there, as much as it is about the couple. You know, you want to say, like, yeah, you're not just here to witness something. You're here because something is changing in your life, guests, right? Or whatever we want to call them. There's a new, I mean, I was thinking about, as you were talking, I was thinking about the analogy between a wedding and a baby naming type ceremony, whether it's a bris or a baby naming or whatever, that it's really not so much about the baby. The baby has no idea what's going on. It's different because here the couple does know what's going on. But when you think about why we're so excited that a baby comes into the world, it's got very little to do with the baby. It's got a lot to do with how we're so thrilled that this new person is coming into our lives. And we don't think about a wedding so much that way, but maybe we should, and maybe our rituals deeply do. And they're saying, yeah, actually, something cool is happening for the couple for sure. But also something really cool is happening for us. There's a new being coming into the world, and we're going to now interact with this new being in a very different way than we used to interact with the individual people. And that's something for us to have that's new as a community, and we should be celebrating for ourselves. And so the idea that the breaking of the glass somehow immediately transitions from the focus on the couple to the focus on the community feels pretty cool to me. And I'm interested in, like, how you could expand on that.
It's interesting. I love hearing that, Dan, because one of our children, we keep trying to convince them that we should just elope and go to someplace beautiful and we don't need any of this. And that our children are the ones forcing us to do the ritual. You know, and I said, fine, if we're going to do the ritual, we're going to do the ritual. Let's go all the way in. And for the kids, even though my partner has been in their lives for a very long time and is effectively their parent in so many ways, this is the moment where it changes for them, that we become, they said, a real family, which I've tried to dissuade. I said, that's not what makes you a real, all kinds of things, you know, whatever my tendencies are, they are not having it. It's the ritual, not the signing of anything, nothing legal, but it's the ritual that changes it for them. And I was like, well, I guess that's a good clergy kid, if that's what they think changes. And then I was thinking also that, you know, in other people's weddings, often I'll hear, we want a Jewish wedding. And I was like, great, what do you mean by that? And what I'll hear is chuppah, the canopy, and I'll hear the breaking of the glass. Those are the two components that we think of. And I think we talked about this in early episodes, that when we think of Jewish, it's these two sort of bookends.
I'd also add usually hora, usually going up on chairs. It might not even be to Jewish music, but like going up on chairs at the party.
Yeah. I think once you've fallen off those chairs, you don't want those though anymore. But yeah, I think that is like what part of the celebration feels that like, and I think you can keep adding to it. But I'm curious, what do you two think? What is the core thing that makes a ceremony Jewish?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. I think I spend almost no time thinking about that question. Not that it's a bad question. I do so many ceremonies, like the majority of weddings I officiate are interfaith. And I talked about this the last time we spoke about weddings. I don't see my role as like representing Judaism as much as I see my role as channeling the shared ritual goals of that couple, which, because they've asked me, and usually because I'm a rabbi, include Judaism, Jewish things, but also include other goals of theirs. I don't know. I don't think anything makes it Jewish or not. I do think that if somebody makes the conscious choice to break a glass, even if they have no other liturgical Hebrew or like Jewish invocations, usually they are doing that for the purpose of having it feel to themselves and their attendees that this is Jewish. Like, I do think that that is the ritual work that action is doing. It's coding to the world, a Jewish thing just happened, or at least a not Jewish thing just happened. That's actually meaningful and powerful to a lot of people in the room, that your wedding, even if it's not a bunch of liturgy, would be marked as a Jewish moment. For a lot of couples today, like, a wedding is not deeply religious at all. Like it's other things. I mean, maybe it's religious in my sense of religious, like it's sacred, it's special. But for most of the weddings that I attend, just because of like who many of my friends are, Jewish and not, it's primarily a community occasion, a family occasion, but like the invocation of religious meaning is not always, not never, high on the list. So I don't know what makes it Jewish. I do think that small things like a glass breaking, having wine. I will say I love what you're saying about the role that your kahal, your community, plays. I'm trying to avoid the term like guests or attendees because I actually think that's part of the problem. I think as an officiant who regularly officiates weddings, I have a different sense of what I'm doing, even at weddings that I'm not officiating. Like when I'm an officiant, for the rest of that couple's life, I am the rabbi who officiated their wedding. Like I have a role in their life that will never go away. And that's actually a powerful thing. That has led me as an attendee, even of weddings that I don't officiate, to have a kind of mental status in my head, like, oh, this is a couple that thought I was important enough to be an attendee at their wedding. And I actually hold that as like a meaningful status in the world. Like that matters. That means that whatever I thought about them from my side, they thought that I was somebody to invite to their wedding. I only decline invitations to weddings if I really can't go. If it's like, because it's not about my read. It's about they thought that I was a person who would hold that role in a meaningful way. So like, but I also hope that other people feel that way. Like I hope that the people who came to my wedding felt like they were doing a thing and not watching a thing. I actually will eternally think of the people that we invited to our wedding as people we invited to our wedding that are like of that status.
Well, let's actually dig into that on a theory level to what you're just talking about, Lex, because the original question, and as I'm reflecting on what you're saying, I'm thinking back to, the OG days of Judaism Unbound when we interviewed folks about elite Judaism and folk Judaism. And I think that when we look at weddings, there's a folk element and an elite element. And then I think there's also a middle element. And that's what I want to explore a little. So the elite element, elite Judaism is what, classically the rabbi thinks it is. So if we were going to ask a rabbi Miriam's question, what makes something a Jewish wedding, they'll probably in many cases cite chapter and verse, well, there has to be a chuppah, and there has to be 7 blessings, and there has to be a ring, and there has to be you say, by this ring I betroth you according to the laws of Moses, whatever, that there's a set of rules and regulations, a ketubah, breaking of the glass, etc. And like if you don't do certain things, it's kind of like a problem. If you ask a regular Jew, most people, what makes something a Jewish wedding, I think they'll say something much closer to, well, there would be a chuppah there would be a breaking of the glass, and maybe 1 or 2 other things. And it makes me think of that famous cartoon, the Far Side cartoon by Gary Larson, where there's a panel where it says what people say, and a person's talking to a dog, and they say, sit, Rover, come, Rover. Do you want to eat now, Rover? Something like that. And then it says, what does a dog hear? And it says, blah, 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 Rover, blah, 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 Rover, blah, 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 Rover. And I actually think that 2 really different things tend to be happening at most weddings and probably most ceremonies and rituals of all kinds. One is what the officiant or leader or rabbi thinks is happening, and the other is what the people think is happening. Now, which one is real? I mean, they're both real, but they're actually not matching. And it feels to me like there's a kind of a magic to an officiant who really deeply is understanding what the kahal, as you say, the people in the room, what they're feeling and what they're seeing, and is sort of trying to maybe bridge elements that come from the elite form to a version that the folk can really understand. I think that's a translation, what you could call that a translation act, or maybe something else. And sometimes there are things that just won't translate. Like, I don't think there's anything you could do for the folk to care about the 7 blessings. Like, they don't care if there are 7.
I would push you on that, but I keep going.
Okay, I mean, I don't think that they care that there are 7. I don't think they care which ones they are. I think if you gave them 8, they would be fine with it. I think if you gave them 4, they would be fine with it. Now, should there be any blessings? I mean, yeah, I think probably yes. Meaning, like, I think that on a deep level, a lot of folk that are at weddings expect there to be some kind of blessings going on. So I affirm that. I just think that the things that people tend to get hung up on, I mean, officiants, rabbis tend to get hung up on, which is that these exact 7, or that they have to be, even if we're going to modify them, that they have to be on the same themes or something like that. I don't think anybody in the room has a clue about that. And so the question becomes for me, is that important, or how is that important? And does it make it not Jewish, let's say, if you did no blessings at all, or definitely not
Certainly
the
not.
seven? You know, and I think that a lot of people would say, if there's not a breaking of the glass at the end, it doesn't feel like a Jewish wedding to me. Whereas I think that the majority of those people would not say that about the seven blessings. So I'm curious, like, what we make of what makes something Jewish. I just don't think that I don't have an ideological answer to that question, but I do have a sociological answer to that question, or a sociological question about that question.
I do think that there are more people. I don't think they need the seven blessings necessarily. I do think that if somebody went to a ceremony that had seven Hebrew blessings and no breaking the glass, virtually everybody in the space would experience it as a Jewish thing just happened. Like the use of Hebrew,
but a crappy one.
Maybe. I mean, like, so I will tell you, one of the most frequent comments. I'm always interested in what people say to me as the officiant after I officiate. I'm always curious, like, what strikes them. One of the first comments I often hear is that people say to me, wow, you talked about that number 7. And it had never occurred to me that there's a reason for 7 circles and 7 blessings, that it ties to the creation of the universe. And the job of a wedding is that you're creating a new universe, the universe that is that couple collectively and not just that couple independently. So there is an actual, like, sorcery act that is happening through 7 where you are creating something new, and the new thing is like your life together. It's not
but that's because you explained that, right? That's because they wouldn't have come up with that on their own.
No. But I'm saying...
Yeah, so you did a great job as that translator.
But I appreciate that. But I think that there are... When we have a mind to what you described, to, like, what the folk experiences, like, it's not going to be meaningful to them that 7 is invoked because 7 is a Jewish number. I mean, it might be. But, like, for some of them, they will need something more than that. And, look, I will tell you, I didn't cite that 7 thing. I love what you said about how there could be 3, there could be 4, there could be 8. Like, I like the 7, and I do have that go-to hyperlink to creation of a new universe. But I did a wedding on May 5th that was 5-5, and there were other 5s, and they had met on May 5th 5 years before. It was like 5-5, like all the 5s. I ditched my 7 stuff. I mean, there were still 7 blessings, actually, but I didn't say anything about, like, oh, we're having 7 and 7 is a creation. Like, I ditched that because for that wedding, we were going to dwell in the 5 symbology. And I forget exactly what it is, but I found some stuff related to the number 5, and they were really moved by that. And what's weird is there were 5 birds that everybody told me afterwards. There was, like, a little flying V of 5 geese or something that flew over, and people came up to me and mentioned that afterwards. And I was like, okay, I didn't do that, but, like, thank you. So,
or did you?
It's just having an eye on the unique. Yes, exactly. I made it happen. I appreciate when people say I'm good at this, or when people would say that Miriam is good at this. I don't think it's like a deep set of skills. I think it's a reframe. I think it's just the second you are looking for a Jewish ceremony or any ceremony to be unique and to, like, shine whatever its unique light is, to get a little woo, like to just identify what is the ness of that couple and how do you magnify it using some of the traditional ritual and some of non-traditional ritual. Like, usually there is something in traditional text that already ties to a cool thing about the couple. So you just magnify that in that ceremony. That's how I tend to go about it.
You know, I've been thinking a lot about 2 elements. One is just the role of nostalgia and ritual, and something old and something new, something borrowed, something blue. Well, that's, so Western and American. I think it applies to almost any ritual as well, that we're evoking memory as we're also creating something new. And as we've been thinking about Shabbat Unbound and what is actually unique about what we're creating in a Sabbath experience through this lens of co-creation and returning to original ways of thinking about Judaism so that it can reflect the new one, that I think it requires a level of creativity and also openness and confidence. And I would hope that any of our listeners would say, okay, whatever wedding you guys are talking about, it's kind of crazy, but I do feel empowered and I do have the tools to make something that's meaningful for myself. When I think about what we're doing with our wedding, it's like we've taken a cloth or a dress and we've cut it all up and we've laid out the pieces, and now we're going to create a new garment. And I do think having a sense of rootedness in the old or the ancient or the meaningful that you're weaving or sewing this garment into does have to be very anchored. And I find that I've taken apart the seven blessings, and I try to always get couples to do this, and like three have done it, where I say, pick seven people or pick a group of people in your life and have them write 100-word blessing, and then they'll popcorn during the ceremony. It'll be so cool. And it actually, when it works, it's amazing. It requires a lot of, artistic sort of direction to make it happen. And I found that as I am taking apart my own ritual, the role of Hebrew is suddenly important to me. And I'm thinking, well, why all of a sudden, why am I able to unpack, throw away the Hebrew in other contexts, but in this one, that's part of the weaving? And I think that there is a danger when we take it all out and it can be exchanged as any other ceremony, any other religious or cultural context. And how do you allow it to speak through you? In our case, I think just because of our orientation as a partnership, it required a lot of deep study. What is the role of kiddushin, like the moment of making the ceremony holy? What is the moment of erusin, the moment that you're joining together? What is the moment of the vows? What are we doing there? What's the covenantal part? And I think Judaism Unbound does give us that framework to think carefully about what each part means, and then how do you link that back to Jewish tradition, even if it's not explicit on the outside. But it's really, really hard both to have that confidence and to say, what makes it Jewish isn't the Hebrew or even the people in the room, but what makes it Jewish is it links back or creates a new chain in the link of tradition, or as Dan, I think you say, the unbroken or the broken chain of tradition. How do you say it?
Well, I'm always talking about how people talk about the unbroken chain of tradition, but it's not really unbroken. You just kind of reattach the broken pieces later.
Right. So I think that in every Jewish ritual, we are creating a broken piece version of that chain. Even if we've opened up the rabbi's manual and we turn to page 4 and we read directly from the book, we are recreating something just by the nature of the people in the room. And so what would it mean to take it very, very seriously, that we actually are forming a chain as we're creating this, and that the people who are around us are also learning something in the process just by us being intentional about how we're creating it.
Yeah. The broken chain thing, maybe that's a new teaching on why we break the glass. We're naming the broken chain that is also, creative and being reattached to create new traditions. I don't know. I want to sit again with sort of the fullness of, Miriam, your wedding, and not that the ceremony, like the technical moment of religious ritual ceremony, is not extra important, but like you have oriented to the full experience before the wedding, when people are in town, I would argue as ritual. And that's why you've put thought into having things like a day of political action. There is a sense, again, to Dan's point about folk and elite, like I think to most couples, yes, the ceremony is called the ceremony, but like the first dance in the quote unquote party, the everything, like the reason why there's so much angst about all those things is that they are also ritual. They are also doing ritual work, and you want that work to be meaningful and achieve the goals that it has. And so the sense I'm getting is like, you're taking something you and David would do as a couple and that you would do with your family anyway, and you're inviting your community to do it with you. It's like you're modeling what the rest of your life experiences will be. I wish in retrospect that Val and I had everybody come and like throw a frisbee around with it, like something that we do sometimes together with the broader community as like, oh, we're doing something in this ceremony that is meant to set a framework for what we'll be doing the rest of our lives together. I might be getting wrong how you're orienting to that, but my question is basically like, how have you thought about the rest, quote unquote, of the ritual or of your wedding experience beyond just the ritualized moments in the ceremony?
I think that there is a luxury of being at a different stage in life, that nobody else is paying for it. You're making a choice between, do I want to make another mortgage payment, or do I want to have like a different part of kind of food or dessert that you're having? I think you're making lots of different choices than maybe at a different stage in life. We made some pretty core choices, like the whole process is vegetarian. We felt that was really important to not take more from the world, to source it only from local people. For us, we don't have a huge budget. We're not people of great means. And so we decided that our primary budget would be the ceremony. And if everyone can just have like pizza and beer and root beer at the after party, that's cool. Like we're not here to perform. We're here to be part of something. And then because we're Jewish professionals and because we have a serious Jewish life, we do have a Shabbat evening of just sort of the closest group of people, and that will include Shabbat sing in a pretty traditional space. David's family is Orthodox, and so how do you weave their needs and their version of life into it? And his stepmother, who is his only surviving parent, is a wonderful, deep Baptist believer. And where does she see herself? And so how do you have people at different moments see themselves and a part of it, even if it's deeply unfamiliar? And I feel like our life is sort of like that. And then one component also is Havdalah, the ending of the Sabbath experience, will be in our home, which we cannot fit everyone. It's not going to be comfortable. It's November in Ohio, so it'll be, cold. And yet we feel it was important to track all that mud through our house and just sort of to be in that one space. I think those are different ways of sort of seeing the whole process. And also, of course, that we're solidifying what we're doing as a family unit and not just as a couple.
Miriam, I'm curious if you could reflect a little bit more on the difference between a wedding for people who are in their 40s, whether it's a first marriage or not a first marriage, but just the age element and the other elements if you're interested, if you have something to say about them. But I'm also thinking about Lex's comment just before about regrets about his wedding. Not that it was a major regret, but, regret, like if I was the person I was today, I would have known that we should throw a Frisbee around at the wedding, but I didn't
I've
know
decided
that.
Since then we would have played a kickball game as a group because we were in an intramural kickball league where we met a bunch of our friends. That's the real answer.
Yeah, but it's like, same with my kids and their bar mitzvahs, right? I mean, like, I hope that my kids will have regrets about their bar mitzvah, that they didn't do something more creative. But I also understand that at that stage of their life, they wanted, for a variety of reasons, to do it the regular way, right? Or whatever they would have thought about it. Well, and so in that sense, Lex's bar 26 which I mentioned at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. Having kind of a second bar mitzvah when you become 26. And Lex, I guess your tri mitzvah is I'm going to
do stuff for my 39. It doesn't roll off the tongue as well, but yeah, when I'm 39, there will be a follow-up.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe starting to think about that. But a wedding when you're in your 40s, it's like a different beast, right? We call them both a wedding, but maybe one of the ways in which we need to be thinking in new ways about Jewish ritual really has to do with the great frequency of people now getting married at a later age, whether that's their first marriage or a second marriage or beyond second. And so I'm curious, just from a ritual innovation standpoint, how you think about that question.
So I think there's different ways you could look at this. I remember in the congregational setting when I would see people in my age group or older getting married a second, third, fourth time, I would just be like, why? What need is there to do this? It's very expensive. Like, why are you doing this? And almost always the answer was because I want to call them my wife. I want to call them my husband. I want to call them something that felt like it meant something different. I want to pledge an eternal bond. And I still didn't understand it at the time. And I apologize to all of you who I might have had this conversation with out in the world. I'll hate for that piece. But I didn't understand why you needed to ritualize that. Like, that's already happening and this seems expensive. And so when I thought about this moment and when we decided that we did want a ritual to mark what we are to each other, I said, I don't want a ring that has never been important to me, but I would really love a new bathtub. And so David and I talked about like remodeling a piece of our house that, we have young children that everyone would enjoy. And in the end, he wanted to have some kind of proposal ceremony with our children, and the children were presented with these beautiful necklaces from his family, rings from their family that were made into necklaces for them. And I was proposed to in the bathtub, which was super sweet until the lights came on. And then you realized we're in a bathroom. So that piece was, just different. I don't think if I was in my 20s, I would have thought I'd rather something very practical that we would use all the time. I also think that something different, at least I had a beautiful first wedding. The first time I was married was in my best friend's backyard, and I had all these rabbi friends, and so like 10 of them sang Havdalah, and we were singing, and we walked down the aisle together under the chuppah that everyone was holding, and it was all the different rabbis saying different Jewish prayers, and it was just deeply sort of in that moment, and we danced in the grass. I didn't really think about too many of the components. I let other people hold all those parts for me. And it felt almost like I was the guest of honor, and I was just fostering the environment and footing the bill so that they could give this to me. And so when I thought about it at this stage in my life, and I also think, being female, I feel like a different place in my life. And I got really into bell hooks recently, and she has this way of seeing women in their midlife that we have an invisibility to us. We're not needed to bring children to the world or to nurse children. We're not the same sort of level of sexual interest as we were maybe when we were younger. And so there's this freedom that comes from being a little bit more invisible in the world. I experience that, and I experience it as a level of freedom. And that freedom means like full awareness and control of every moment that I am saying yes. And there's like conscious consent to every piece. And so if I'm going to be in partnership, then it has to involve a deep intention and choice in every piece. I also would say, so I think that's the biggest difference. It's not really the quality of anything. It's like where my mind is and what I feel like is mine to choose. I also think you shouldn't have regrets. Have another bar mitzvah. Have another anniversary of these things. We can have renewable vows. Our marriages change all of the time. I really believe in the sevens. I don't think it's a 7-year itch. I do think that we change as humans. We're not the same people. Hopefully, we are at 20 or 30 or 40 or 50. And so to say, every decade, I'm going to sit down and say, oh my gosh, we made it through a decade. Can you believe it? Who are you anymore? And what am I promising to you for the next 10 years? And maybe it's the same promises every single time. And like maybe you're one of those lucky ones that never has to do it. But there's a reason that our tradition says every 7 days we mark a turning of the world. And we do that through rest and intention and light. And why wouldn't that also be true interpersonally? I don't know. I can imagine doing something, maybe you can't sort of rent out the hall the same way, but you certainly could mark it in community and in the different villages that happen throughout your growing family life too.
I'm reflecting on the difference between us, you and me, when we teach Judaism Unbound together. And one of the things that I find, I think we do both things and we're interested in both, but I feel like you tend to have what I call a poetic reinterpretation of the traditional rituals. And that's enough for you. Like you say, well, if the breaking of the glass, let's say, you would say, I don't really like the idea that we're mourning the temple. That doesn't move me, but I have a different poetic, beautiful interpretation of what the breaking the glass might mean, sort of like what Lex did. And I tend to be like, no, let's figure out the real ritual intent of the ritual, and let's create a new ritual that's going to better get at that intent. And I don't care. It could be not a breaking of the glass. It could be maybe a cutting up of a curtain, whatever it would be. But it would get at the same, it would be a more powerful way to express that kind of original ritual intent, partly because I suspect that ancient people had a deeper sense of this like human need that we've sort of lost track of a little bit because we have a lot of other distractions. Anyway, what's interesting to me about the way that you're approaching your wedding, it feels a little bit more like you're playing around with the rituals and adding things, getting rid of things in ways that are a lot more dramatic than I think that the way that at least I experience you typically thinking about rituals. And I'm wondering if that's just because you're older, because it's a second wedding, because you feel more free. And the reason I'm asking that is because I'm kind of thinking about our listeners who are in their 20s, let's say, and they are going to be having their first wedding. And there is a sense that you kind of want to do it the, quote, right way or the old way. And I guess the question is, should they be listening to this and saying, hey, we could do our first wedding in our 20s like a really different way? Or is what we're talking about here really something that is most possible when for some reason either you're older or you are a rabbi or whatever, you feel sort of a little bit liberated from that way that it generally is, and you feel able to play around with it much more because, I've already done this the old way once.
When you learn through a certain lens, it can't help be embodied in some way. The chavrut I have with the two of you, I think with Dan, I think that the iron sharpens iron is a real thing, and that I've learned a lot to think about, like, the poetry doesn't really mean anything if you can't actually translate it and understand all the different components, and that the knowledge really matters. And that was always important to me, but I sort of forgave it when it would come to the poetry. And I think all three of us are artists in different ways. And I'm a painter, and I am obsessed with pigments and how you create pigments, and like the quality of the color matters. And I think with Lex, my chavruta with you is actually an easier, like, more natural. It's not in the same contrast. So when we lead something together, I kind of like know that Lex and I will be able to flow in a way that it's not oppositional in the same way. It's a different kind of challenge. And yet I surrender the poetry to Lex because, frankly, he's better at it than I am. And so I feel like I'm in between.
That's really sweet of you.
You are. It's like Dan is better at the other piece. And for me, I think that maybe I just sit sort of in the middle. Maybe age is part of it, but I actually think it's about confidence. I think you can have that at any stage, to believe that this tradition has survived transformation every single generation, and that you cannot screw it up. There's nothing you can do that will dishonor what came before you. And something that gives me confidence is to think always of my grandfather, a Holocaust survivor, who when he was 17 in Buchenwald concentration camp, could never have imagined me. And that it would make him smile, like he loved who I became. And that the rituals that we create now are honoring our ancestors in all kinds of ways. Don't wait until you're 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 to make something meaningful for yourself, and to find officiants, clergy, friends who help usher that and bring that out of you, that the value of the chavrut and the partnership will help transform you. And I guess if I would give one sort of old person advice, it would be to not surrender your agency in this moment. Don't give it away and say it's all about somebody else and who they can create for me, but to believe that you can be intentional about it right now.
That's beautiful. That's really, really beautiful. This opens up something really important, and it might be like a cynical truth, but I think that part of why weddings are treated with such a reverence, and why there's like this whole wedding industrial complex, and like, is that society has conceptualized marriage as basically the last big ticket life moment before you die. There's not another secularly recognized or even Jewishly recognized moment. I guess you could dig and be like, oh, there's this thing of having a second bar mitzvah when you're like 83, when you're 70 years past. But like, really, in terms of things people recognize as a big gathering and moment, weddings are holding like everything between when you enter adulthood and when you die. And that's not like a happy thing to say, but I think that is how we have constructed this societally. If Val and I decided to have like some kind of renewal thing, we're still married, we're doing a thing to mark that we're different people, like, I think it would be awesome. And honestly, I would go into that very nervous as I invite my friends and loved ones, that they would look at that and be like, oh, you're being kind of selfish. Like, you're like, the ritual you get is wedding, and then like having all these other ones where you would like be focusing on yourself or focusing on your couple, it's kind of extraneous or superfluous. And so I would feel like, I'm not saying I'm not going to do it, but like, I think that's what society has constructed. And I think that the benefit, the positive side of people who are having a wedding later in life is that they get to channel that. But what I'm getting to is I think we should use that and really try to shift the reality and say that 13-year check-in or the 7-year check-in, whatever the rhythm is, I think we have a sprawling, massive gap, Jewishly and society-wide, that needs to be filled. It's not just like, oh, it'd be nice. I think it is a problem that we don't ritualize the ways we shift between whenever it is we're married and when we are no longer around. That, like, that's, it shouldn't be seen as like, oh, what an interesting woo thing to like be 45 and think about what it means to be 45 and gather people about it. Like that should be standard. And I am going to say out loud on this podcast that like I am going to commit to like surmounting the initial nerves I have, even if people do think I'm being a little inward looking.
I think you're totally right. I also think like Bell Hooks is saying, that there's a level of invisibility about middle age, and that if you have a family, then it's about your children. And if you don't have a family, then is it about your dog? Like there's a weird emphasis on otherness and who you should be during this time. But I was thinking as you were saying this, I'm like, what are you talking about, Lex? You two take your birthdays really seriously. You have birthdays
True.
the way like a 5-year-old has a birthday. And I say that like in joy and celebration, and your friends show up and you take it seriously. And that's a great moment to be saying. It doesn't have to just be about your reunion.
That's true. No, I do that. And even the 39, even the thing I'm describing where it's like every once in a while birthday would be an extra level of status. You're right. I do have this yearly check-in, and I take it as, for myself, a kind of new year. Like the most authentic new year for me is I started my life on November 17th, and then I hit the checkpoint. Like that is my new year in terms of when my body came into, like in terms of my journeys around the sun. So like all the other New Years are less New Year-ish by a certain standard than that one. So I do take that seriously. So I appreciate you like you're right.
You're doing it,
I shouldn't discount that. I want to actively underscore in the way that Shemitah every 7 years is like a bolded moment to check in about Jewish values and commitment to certain things. I believe that our society is suffering because we don't have every once in a while bolded moments. Yeah, when people turn 40, when people turn 50, like there's round ages, but we mostly associate those with like crisis of, oh, I'm becoming older and I'm scared and fearful about that. We don't see, like it's actually shocking and scary to me how thoroughly a lot of my friends, even at their late 20s or early 30s, experience each birthday as negative. They experience it as I'm aging, I'm not young anymore, or I'm less young. And like for me, I don't know, I can't tell them to feel differently about it, but I wish we could build a world where like, oh wow, I'm at a different stage of my life where I am gonna do new ways of being in the universe, and not just see it as, oh, I'm not my younger self anymore. I have more pains and aches or whatever.
Lex, I've been listening to you, and it's just, I wish people could see how we've been smiling through all of this, and the nature of partnership and friendship and chavrut, and how we evoke new ways of seeing our own lives and remind ourselves of what we're already doing and what we need to be doing, and that we have the agency and tools to do those things. And I also have felt a part of me through this whole conversation, a bit of pain. I think that if I was listening to this and was single, not by choice, or was going through a divorce, or had been through a hard one, or a product of one, haven't been all of those things before, it's hard to think about these things. And yet these rituals also include you, that in any moment that we're making a change. And I will say that when I was divorced, I decided I had to do something the moment that my house was mine again. And that looked like taking all the mezuzot down, the blessings, and writing new prayers for myself and putting them on my doorpost. I wrote a poem for what I did when I received the divorce paperwork, and what I did with the things around the house that kept showing up for the next year and a half, 2 years, that still sort of emerge every once in a while. And that that every moment of change at every stage in our lives can be transformed through intentional ritual that you get to create yourself. And I think there's great resources out there, but I also think that the role of this podcast is to ask the question, what is the job of a ritual in this moment? What is the job of the Jewish part of all this? How can I bridge those things? And to believe that you have a right to them. And by that, I mean, you don't have to wait for somebody else to create it or wait for a book to come out. That you can ask the questions for yourself. What do I need right now? What am I trying to mark in this moment? And just do it, and include the people who love you and want to celebrate you in that. I think without embarrassment, or without sort of the caveat of, well, I'm at this stage and so I can't do this, or I don't have the right finances for this, or I'm in a different stage of these things, that every moment can be heightened through intention of marking it.
Yeah, I think that's a great moment to end on. And I realized, since I said the thing about no life cycle moments between wedding and death, that on the Jewish side, that is mostly true. There's not really anything underscored. I did just recognize, like, we have the retirement party. We have the moment of retirement, which does presume people who worked till usually around age 65 and then retire. So that's not nothing. That I want to consider that could actually be a meaningful moment. I think we could underscore that more. But I hope all of our takeaways from this conversation are, A, that we can really make deep meaning out of weddings specifically. I don't want the takeaway to be like, oh, because at the end we talked about other things, that we're saying weddings should be less important. Like, weddings are magic. I really think they're sorcery. I'm a ritualist. I think that a couple actually changes. I'm not going to say metaphysically, but like that day, there is a difference between the before and the after as a result of doing a bunch of carefully considered rituals. I don't even care if they're the traditional Jewish rituals or secular rituals or some other, like, I do believe in a transformation. And I would like that transformation to not be so singular in the scheme of adult ritual. I really think that what you just said about folks who are single not by choice or divorced or both, or like other places in life, part of what we need to do is construct a ritualized universe that is not only anchored on coupledom and on nuclear family. I mean, something that I think about, because I don't have kids and it's not clear to me / us that we will, is that, like, there are those rituals that you have through your kids as you age older into life. And if you don't have kids, then it's different. And I think that's part of why I'm hypersensitive to this. But I think there's active steps we can take to change that. And that's sort of the aspirations of this show, is to be a kind of thought container to then create what we wish to see in the world. So I hope that all of you out there can do that on the wedding front and on the other ritual front. That both of those are Gemaras, are like commentaries on this conversation's Mishnah, on this conversation's original take. So we're going to close it out and just say thank you to all of you out there for listening. If you have creative experiences you've already organized in your life or that you're planning to, please let us know about them. We would love to hear, and maybe even like share them with the world so that they can affect future rituals. Send us notes at Dan@JudaismUnbound.com, Lex@JudaismUnbound.com, Miriam@JudaismUnbound.com. We also would love to get messages from you on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All of those are at Judaism Unbound for our handles. And like we mentioned at the top, we have our 8-week courses that just began this past week, and it's not too late to sign up, so you can do that at JudaismUnbound.com/classes. So thank you all so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.